So hello everyone, welcome on the weekly Sunday webinar by Welcome Solutions. And today we have very special guest, Vicky Sherwood. And a few words about Victoria. Dr. Sherwood holds a PhD in Biosciences from the University of Nottingham. And she, after her PhD, she went on to do a few postdocs and started her own research lab in 2011 in the UK. And she ended up as a principal investigator at the University of Dundee, doing research on the molecular basis for the development of metastatic skin tumors. And that's quite amazing, because that means she already got to this holy grail that we always hope for when we are academics. But she left heaven on her own will. So despite her academic success, in 2017 she stepped out of academia and she made the transition into the medical communications field. And her experience from the transition sparked a personal interest in career opportunities for STEM PhDs, STEM researchers. And now she leads her own blog, Biomed Badass, which I can totally recommend. I've seen a few posts, very good quality stuff, guys. So if you are in biomedical sciences, totally look it up. You can see how hot it is. I'm actually getting wet without moving. So I think I will be using a towel a lot today. Today we first will start the usual way. So I will give the floor to Vicky, and thank you so much for accepting the invitation. And please tell us a little bit about your personal story and up to this point.
Sure. Well, thank you, Natalia, for inviting me. It's fantastic to be here. I love the whole Welcome Solutions thing that you're doing. I think it's brilliant. So my background, I mean, you gave me a great introduction. I did my undergrad many years ago now. I can't even remember how far back. When I finished my degree, it was in biology and biochemistry. I went out into industry and got a job at a medical devices company. And I did 1 year there. And we were working on inhalers for a variety of different drugs. We had GSK as one of our biggest clients because they make salbutamol for asthma. But we were also working on something innovative, which was an inhaled form of insulin. I think Pfizer was the client at the time, and they'd got FDA approval for this new inhaled insulin, which they released onto the market. And the company I was working for was making the device. It's subsequently been withdrawn because it had contraindications for lung disease. But at the time, it was quite exciting to develop this new device. And that's the work we were doing. And I made an observation at the time that most of the managers who were leading the science teams on this project and all the projects across the company had PhDs, or at least had postgraduate education. So I thought, if I'm going to climb up in this company as a scientist, I really ought to go back to university and get a postgraduate education. So that's exactly what I did. I went to Nottingham, and as you said, I graduated in 2006 with a PhD in virology. I was looking at DNA tumor viruses. And I'd worked really hard, like most PhD students do, trying to get everything to work. It wasn't the perfect PhD by any stretch. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working through. I enjoyed kind of being my own boss and working through projects and managing the project. But I wasn't very strategic, and I didn't think about my career. And I made that mistake that a lot of people make, which is just, I thought I'll sort it all out at the end when I write my thesis and everything will be fine. And of course, at the end, I had to just get something. So I kind of went down the default route, and I took a postdoc because they're just easier to get. And, you know, you have the network in academia, and my supervisor knew people. And so I went off and I got a postdoc at the University of Bath in Somerset in the UK. And I loved it. I really enjoyed my time there. I always entered into academia thinking, and doing my PhD, thinking I would eventually return back to industry. That was the reason I went in the first place. But during this time in Bath, I got so engrossed in the research. I was working on a new RAS effector molecule, and hyperactive RAS causes tumor development. So it was really exciting trying to understand what this molecule does. We discovered loads of new things, and I got completely enthralled in it. And that whole concept of thinking about going back to industry at this time completely disappeared for me. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to keep doing work. I love oncology. I love cancer research. So I took a second postdoc. I decided to go abroad and see what life was like outside the UK, which is one of the best things I've ever done. If you want to learn about your own country, go and live abroad, because it gives you a completely different perspective. And actually, that is one good thing about academia. You can easily go abroad if you find the right postdoc for you. So, you know, if you're thinking about doing a postdoc, I could strongly recommend, you know, one abroad is fantastic to immerse yourself in a different culture. And at that time, I was working on melanoma, so I was working on aggressive metastatic skin tumors, and I really started to develop a niche in that area. And I returned in 2011 to start my own group in the UK. And I worked on that up until 2017, which is when I decided to move into industry, but I'll get onto that in a minute. So it was a very exciting time coming back to the UK and starting my own group, but it was right on the back of the financial downturn from 2008. So money was scarce. Academia was in the UK at least trying to find its feet again. You know, we'd bailed out the banks, we paid huge money as a taxpayer, and things needed to be cut. And so money into the universities was one of those things, and the universities had to work out a new financial model. And the main model that they used, at least in the UK, was to increase the tuition fees and base their finances mainly on undergraduate tuition. And up until this day, that's still the case. There was a lot of debate at the time whether that was the right thing to do or not, but we lost most of the centralized funding. So what this meant was that a lot of the research then was completely dependent upon external funding money, and you had to apply for this money. And a lot of people therefore were employed on soft money. And soft money means money that you have to keep getting in from the government or from charities or whoever the funding bodies are. So, you know, it was tough. And as a new lecturer at the time, I had to deal with learning how to teach, writing all the teaching that I needed to do, because it was a teaching post that I took, the first one that I took when I first came back. Plus I had to get the money in, develop the group, develop the niche, get out doing talks. It was a real hustle. So that step from postdoc to PI, it's quite a big one. And I would say the academic system doesn't prepare you very well for it. You can, you know, learn from your mentor, but when you're doing it yourself, it's quite a shock. And I remember when I was a postdoc in Bath, one of my co-supervisors at the time said, "Oh, this postdoc will be the best academic days of your life. You know, enjoy your postdoc before you become a PI." And I remember thinking, why is he saying that? You know, he's a PI and he gets all these fabulous projects to run, and you know, he's the one that's living the dream, in my opinion. But actually, I realized what he meant when I was starting out my lab. It was tough. I will say it was tough. But at the same moment, it was great fun. Because I got to answer the questions that I was most interested in, and that was fantastic. And that's the part of the job I really enjoyed. However, it came with the fact that I had to write grants continuously, and I was never at the lab bench. And that was quite a shift for me. And I think it might have been seen quite naive to me at the time that I hadn't considered this, because my PIs and my supervisors were never at the lab bench either when I was in academia, but it came as quite a shock to me, even so that I should have known that. And I was just starting to think, is this it for the rest of my life? Am I going to be writing grants forever? Yes, I probably am. Is this what I want? And that niggling feeling that industry was still there, it was still something I was interested in, never actually went away. And it started to resurface probably about 3 years before I actually decided to take the plunge and leave. I started to think, well, there is more out there, and you can be a scientist out in industry where you don't have to worry about the money quite so much. You know, that's kind of taken care of. So I started to explore this more, slowly at first, because my research was going on, my group was growing. I was kind of enjoying what I was doing. So I didn't really take it seriously, but I just started to think what else is out there, and slowly started to build a network of industry contacts again, because prior to that point, I'd say nearly 100% of my network was academic based. So I really didn't have contacts outside of academia. So I started to just introduce a few contacts, ask questions, and basically did a little bit of informational interviewing. Because the other thing I didn't know was the extent and scope of jobs out there. My research was very focused on therapeutics. So we were looking at novel therapeutics for metastatic skin cancers. So I knew that, I had a natural interest for the pharmaceutical industry, but I didn't really know fully the broad spectrum of jobs that were out there within that industry, other than, say, R&D. So I really started to explore that in a little bit more detail over those 3 years. And eventually I found a few things that I thought would be of interest to me. I decided to leave. I decided not to do R&D per se, because I was worried about going into industry and not being able to answer my own questions, which is what I've been doing as a PI. And so I felt that I would find that transition very difficult, because I would be trying to do things that were for the purpose of the products that were being produced by the company. So I decided not to go down the R&D route. So that left the big hole of what else could I do? But in this discovery process, in this research process, I realized that there are an awful lot of jobs in the whole development pipeline of a drug that are not based on research and discovery. So that's only the beginning of the pipeline. But then the whole development part of the drug involves, taking it, manufacturing it, getting it through regulation, getting it marketed, getting the messages out there in the correct way, the communications, and eventually going on and selling the drug in different markets throughout the world. So there's a huge broad spectrum of expertise that aren't necessarily based on research alone at the beginning of the development of the drug process. So I was trying to explore what are the things I could do and what I enjoyed doing. And this also involved a little bit of introspective work myself. I had to ask myself, what aspects of being an academic did I enjoy? I loved managing the lab group and working with other scientists and collaborating and seeing junior scientists come through and training and mentoring them. I absolutely loved that. I enjoyed, even though I said the grant writing was hard, I actually enjoyed writing. I really enjoyed telling people about our results, writing up the papers, going to conferences and presenting. These were the things I really enjoyed. So the communications and the management and the interacting with other scientists were the things that I was looking for. So I was looking for work that would fulfill those personal things that I enjoyed. And I just thought, well, medical communications is the perfect fit, because I get to look at the communications that are going out in the development of the drug process. I can work in teams and eventually become a leader, potentially in some of those teams, and use the management skills that I'd learned in academia. And so it just seemed for me like a logical process. So it took me a long time to come to that conclusion and decide what I wanted to do. But once I did, then I was able to go forward and find people in that industry and start to network. And that's really how I made the transition. So I spoke to people in the medical communications industry, in different companies, at different levels with different experiences, and saw what they enjoyed. And I narrowed it down to a few companies that I was particularly interested through doing this research and talking to people. And I think I had 5 on my list at the end. I applied to 4 of them, and one of them only took people in twice a year. So they only had 2 intakes of people into their company to do medical writing as a profession. So the other 3 invited me for interview, which was fantastic. And I had the interviews consecutively, a few weeks apart from each other. And I was very fortunate enough to get offered the job to all 3. So it was a fantastic moment, because I was able to really choose which company to go for. And it also gave me a little bit of negotiating power on the starting salary. So it was a long process, and I wouldn't say it was easy, but I have made the transition and I haven't looked back. I wouldn't say I don't miss my research. I do. I still have questions that remain unanswered that I left in academia that I would still love to know the answers to, and I still search the literature to see if any of the people that were working in my field, my colleagues, are working on similar questions. But it was the right step for me at the time, and I haven't really looked back, and I enjoy the work I do. I enjoy the impact it has. But it wasn't, I'm making it sound like it was a fairly simple transition, but it wasn't. I had a lot of personal gremlins to overcome during the transition process. You know, the whole leaving academia, the worry about disappointing people, the worry and insecurities that I had around, was I too qualified? Was I too old? You know, I was a PI, I'd been in academia for 16 years. Would anybody want my skills? You know, these were all things that I really fought with. And I hear other people talk about them as well, but I think, wow, if I overcame them and I was so long in the tooth, you can too, you know, as a postdoc or PhD student, absolutely. So yeah, that's kind of my transition story. And I'm happy to talk more about medical writing, Natalia, if you'd like me to talk about my job now and what I do.
Okay,
would
so
you like
thank you
to?
so much, Vicky, for the
Mhm.
great story. I am one comment I have for the people watching this webinar right now. You can ask your questions in the chat any moment, and we will be taking the questions and answering as soon as they come up. So please don't hesitate to ask anything. And from my side, I can say that referring to what you said about your networking skills and networking habits, I can totally endorse that. I think you're really great at networking, I can say, and I can learn a lot from you in that department. So my first question for you would be actually a very practical question. I always wonder about this. How does leaving academia as a PI actually look in practice? Because it's not like a corporate manager. If you are in a corporate manager, you can say, "Sorry guys, I'm quitting," in 3 months, and then you have to find a replacement. But if you're if you're a PI, I guess it's such a specialistic position that only a few people in the world can possibly take over you. So what do you do then if you take that decision?
Sure, and it was, I've said this before, but I reiterate again, it was a really hard decision. And the hardest part was having to tell my research group that I was going. And, I would deny if I'd be lying if I didn't say that they were upset. They were, definitely. But I promised them that, I would fix it. I would find them other people to work with and finish their projects off. And we had funding that needed to run through its course. So I basically handed over the funding to other PIs in the department, who then took on these projects or tailored the projects a little bit more to what their labs were doing. So on a practical level, it wasn't easy. And it was, it was tough emotionally as well for myself and for the group. But we all got through it. I had a PhD student at the time who was writing up. And so I made sure that his thesis was all okay. I'd started my job, but I still worked with him and helped him, read through his thesis remotely from the university and helped him prepare for the Viva. By the time the other PhD students who were coming up to their Vivas in 2 or 3 years' time, they had more time to prepare with their new PI. So, they didn't need me as much, but from a practical point of view, the PhD student who was just about to finish really did need my support whilst I went off, into my new job. So, I made sure that that he was okay, and he passed with minimum correction. So he did really well, even though I left right at the end. And, I hope one day they do forgive me for doing that. But, it was the right thing for me at the time, and I think they understood that. It was really tough when I first said. It came as a shock to a lot of people, my colleagues as well, and people in the field, the wider field that I was working in. I had to go back and tell people and tell my old supervisors that I was leaving as well, and people were very disappointed. And I must have had the same conversation over and over again, like, why? do you want to take some time and think again and reconsider? And it was hard. It was hard. And a lot of times I was thinking, am I doing the right thing? Am I nuts? Why am I doing this? But realistically, I think I should have thought a lot earlier in my career about what I wanted to do. And I think I made that mistake as a PhD student of just ending up into drift, doing postdocs and just going along the career track that was in front of me, instead of really analysing and thinking. I was listening to people and thinking, yes, okay, they're saying I should do this and I should apply for this money and I should apply for this fund. And I did those things and, it worked out for me, which was fantastic. And I wouldn't regret it for a minute, but realistically, I should have been a lot more systematic and thought about my career. I didn't really properly systematically plan my career until I started to think about this transition. And that's kind of where my blog comes in, where I try to talk on my blog about how to ask these questions and think about what it is you want to do next, and from an early stage, not right at the end of your contract or right at the end of your studentship, really starting to think about these things strategically early on. So that's how it kind of worked on a practical level. It was tough. I would admit.
And if I can add something to that, I'm actually currently working on my second book. It's more about job market in general and navigation on the job market, not only for PhDs, but more for educated professionals. And I paid a lot of attention in this book to these illusionary successes, because I have a feeling that many people become victims of their own success. So early on in their career, when they are in high school or in undergrad, during undergrad studies, somewhere along the way, some of their talents are being discovered, and it's usually talents that are discovered in the school system. So, for instance, they are good in sciences, so they are being sent to all these international competitions, and then they get all this appreciation and rewards, and they feel like, yeah, this is my way, I'm really good at this. And they go for it, and they're channeled very early on in one particular direction, or sometimes it's sports. It's very often sports. So there are certain types of talents that the school system is good at picking up on, but there are certain other talents that you have to figure out for yourself, because no one will tell you at school. For instance, if you're good at investing money, or if you're good at dancing, or alpinism, no one would tell you at school about those. So you have to figure that out for yourself. And your landscape of potential is very complex and multidimensional, and it has this global maximum somewhere, but it also has a lot of local maxima. And if you land in one of these local maxima and you basically stay there, then it might take you half your life or even the whole life to discover that maybe that was not your best talent, and maybe you have even more talent somewhere else. But some people discover that really late down the line, and then it's really a problem. So I can definitely see how, yeah. So this is tricky. And now let's maybe take a question from the audience. Right now, Diana is asking, thank you for sharing your personal journey. What would be a good way to start in medical communications? Well, I guess this question assumes that you give an advice to someone who is not an accomplished researcher like you, but rather more junior. So you came from a particular place in academia, but have you developed a feel for the pathways that others have taken?
Absolutely. Great question, Diane. Yes, I should go into this in a little bit more detail. So yes, you're right. I came from a particular place, and actually I got a job based on some of my subject matter expertise. So I was working on oncology, and at the time, and still is, immunotherapies were a hot topic. And I really wanted to work in companies that were working on communications of immunotherapies. So I could target in on the companies I was most interested in, and working on some of those blockbuster drugs was a really big pull for me to particular companies that I wanted to target. So for me, that was like a natural progression. for somebody who maybe doesn't know yet what kind of medical communications they want to work on, I should reiterate that medical communications is a huge industry, and you can specialize in different areas. You can try different things once you're in as well. So for example, you can work on the type of communications I do, which is like scientific publishing, and also how to communicate how drugs are working in the clinical trial data that's coming off to clinicians and other subject matter experts. We call them key opinion leaders. So people who clinicians who are essentially going to trial some of these drugs that the drug companies are developing. So you can work in that area, which is like classical medical communications and publications, or you can do things like regulatory medical writing, where you would be producing FDA approval documents and things like that, or you could be working in medical education, where you're writing more like textbooks, maybe developing, I don't know, anatomy. I know somebody who works in anatomy, and they write books of how surgeons can learn how to do different types of operations. So there's a huge wide range of medical writing you can do that's under the umbrella term medical communications. So the first thing I would do is try and think about which areas you might like to work in, what fits best with the type of writing and the type of communications you would like to do. And then try and look up some of those companies that are doing those, and some of the companies that are doing really well. So which are the companies that are growing and competing well in the market, because they're going to have the jobs, and they're going to have the jobs in the future. And I would say even in an economic downturn that we have now, medical communications is still soaring. So particularly around, you know, COVID and vaccines and this type of work, I've seen loads of jobs around looking for writers who can work on these projects in the pandemic era that we're in right now. So I know the company that I was working for previously in London hired 52 people during the lockdown. So these are companies that are growing. So it's a growth industry, has been a growth industry for the last 10 years, and it hasn't taken any downturn. So there are jobs and opportunities out there, but you do have to look at the companies that are doing well, and that are also stable enough to weather any kind of economic downturn if there is one, because there is huge competition in the companies. So think about aspects of medical writing you'd be interested, then do some research on the companies you'd like to approach. And then I would really recommend taking a networking approach like I did. So rather than just banging out your CV unintroduced, if you like, I would try and talk to some people who are working in those companies as writers, and then talk to them about how it is. I mean, that's essential research for you, because you get to know what the culture is of the place and whether you feel it would be a good fit for you. That's really, really important. It helps you narrow down which companies you're going to apply to. But also at the same time, it makes you a known quantity and increases your visibility to the workforce. So if you're talking to people and they can pass you on to other people and you can talk to them, eventually you may get to talk to a hiring manager or an HR person within that company. And at that point, you get a formal introduction. And that does help. You know, that's what helped me. Eventually, I spoke to the company that hired me in the end. I was speaking to medical writers who worked there or had previously worked there. And eventually somebody said, well, why don't you reach out to the recruiter at the company who does the hiring of people, and ask her some questions about the type of thing she's looking for. So I got a formal introduction to her. And that was my break, because, you know, she was expecting my CV to come in, she was looking out for it, and she invited me for an interview. So that is the best way to make a break into the industry. There are events that can help as well. So if you're in the UK, I would strongly recommend going to one of Peter Llewellyn's events. So he's somebody in the industry who's creating careers fairs, if you like, for medical writing. And that gives you an opportunity to go and hear people talk from the companies and network and meet people face to face. So you're not just reaching out remotely on LinkedIn. That can help, you know, so you can ask questions directly. So I would strongly recommend looking at that. He runs a website called, I've gone blank because it was so long ago that I used it. My Next Medcom's Job, I think it's called, My Next Medcom's Job. And that really gives a lot of resources on how to break into the field and the companies that are hiring and events that he's running. He'll probably be running some events remotely at the minute online, because obviously, you know, there hasn't been meetings going ahead. So I would check him out if you're UK based. Otherwise, you know, I don't know. There must be similar things in the US, but because I wasn't working in the US, I don't know what those networks are. But with a bit of Googling and a bit of research into the industry, I'm sure you'll find them. So I would say network, network, network. That is the way you are going to break into the industry most easily.
And can I ask additional questions? Since you
Sure.
are yourself a blogger, and the question for me would be, is writing your own blog and demonstrating that you can do medical communications, is it a good way to find your first job in medical communications?
That's a great question. Probably to show that you can write different things, I would say yes. I didn't start my blog until a year after I'd made the transition. And the reason I started the blog was that people were reaching out to me asking, how did you make this transition? So I decided, I was answering that question a lot, I would write a blog about it, and it's just taken off from there. So ultimately, yes, I would say it probably does, to show that you write different things. And you don't have to write your own blog. You don't have to set up your website necessarily. You could, you know, you could offer to write blog posts for other bloggers, or you could produce content on LinkedIn, for example. You know, write interesting articles on LinkedIn. You don't necessarily have to set up your own website, you know, and invest that amount of time if you don't want to, although you absolutely could. And I think it's a natural transition. If you want to be in medical communications and you want to be a medical writer, you probably enjoy writing. So, you know, setting up a blog does seem logical. But it certainly wasn't something that I had on my CV when I made the transition. But what I had done things like I'd organised events, I'd organised seminars, I'd organised worldwide events in our field of interest. I'd organised annual symposia for our department and things like this. So I had those sorts of different things other than just academic publication writing. So I had done things like, you know, organized events, teaching things like workshops, other things that might just show that you're involved in other types of communications, I think can help. And so, yes, guest posting, things like that. I'd written a small article for Nature Careers, things like that. So those sorts of things help, I think. If you can reach out and do different types of writing alongside, it's certainly another thing you can put on your CV for sure.
Well, then I have a question about these journals, like Nature or Science, because I know that most of the articles they publish are commissioned, and actually careers became a hot topic in the last 2-3 years. And I think it's not as easy to publish there. So actually I have the story that in the last 2 years, I was doing one project that was a big open project, and it started on Twitter, and then everyone could join, and we were working together on a big manuscript that was about self-management advice for researchers in exact and medical sciences, and STEM and medical sciences. And I was quite proud of this work because it was very collaborative. There was over 40 people from all around the world, and we had people from really good universities, really good mentoring experience, and I think the piece was really good, and there was a big body of work, over 13,000 words, and we had a lot of material, a lot of information. But the problem was, then I started sending it off to journals, and I realized that without being invited, it's really hard to get in, because probably they are really these top-notch journals. They are literally bombed by with similar materials. And in the end, the article went through the desks of maybe 5 editors, and in the end, it ended up in a really good journal called Neuron, and it's like one of the best ones in the field. But I think, I was losing hope at some point. I was like, this was not a good idea. Then this article will never get published. So in the end, by virtue of luck, a little bit, I think we succeeded. But I think in general, the problem on one hand, it's a popular topic because there is a lot of attention that is now given to careers and post PhD career tracks. But on the other hand, there is also a lot of competition because barriers of entry are quite low. So virtually anyone can express an opinion about what they think about post PhD career tracks or careers for young researchers, and almost any researcher can make a statement. So there is a lot of competitive materials. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, well, this was, when did I write this? It would have been around 2018, I think, when I was starting my blog. And I did try a couple of times with a couple of articles. They didn't accept my first one, but they did eventually accept something. So I would say just keep trying. Eventually they might. And, you don't have to write for columns like Nature and Science. Of course, that's great. But actually, to a medical communications company, if you're looking for a job there, it's irrelevant where you're writing. It depends what the types of things you're writing and the broad experience of writing that you have, and whether it's relevant to the types of jobs you're going to be doing. So, I wouldn't say necessarily it matters where. I mean, this is the thing about academia. Everything matters where you're publishing. What funding you're going to get, and whether or not you're going to get that next position or that promotion or that PI position. All depends on the amount of publications you've got, but also where those publications are. It's probably in a way more important in some aspects. But outside of academia, that is actually irrelevant largely. So I wouldn't get too het up on spend, for somebody who's trying to transition into medical communications, I wouldn't get too het up on where you're publishing. I would just try your hand at writing different things so you can put that on your CV as broad expertise. That would be my advice.
I understand, and I have to say that I admire your passion for writing, because if you are writing, if you're working as a medical writer, then to write a blog in your free time, that must be a real passion.
I do like writing. One day I'd like to write a novel, but not right now. I've got too much writing on.
Okay. Let's ask another question from the audience, from
Sure.
Miloš. Now, as you look back, can you suggest how to make this transition to industry smoother? I'm not sure if it ever can be smooth.
Gosh. I think I had, and you brought this up earlier, Natalia, I had more challenges being a PI, I think, to make that transition. I think, if you're finishing up your PhD as a PhD student, and your natural progression is to go into another career, be it a postdoc or transitioning into industry, that's a natural time you would do that. And you close your project by producing your thesis. You may have papers and things to write. You may even have some follow-on money to help you finish off a few things, but generally I think that would be easier and smoother. I'm not saying people might not necessarily want to talk you out of it, like your supervisor, for example, if they really want to push you towards an academic career, you would have pressures there. And you will also still have those, I said they were like personal gremlins that you might have about, what are my skills good enough? Do industry want me? Those types of questions you will still have to overcome anyway. So it's never going to be perfectly smooth. It is a completely different environment you're going into when you go into industry. I could talk for an hour or more about the cultural differences you will face when you enter that new environment and how to progress in that environment. It is completely different to academia in so many ways, but it's a journey. I know that's such a cliche, but it is, and it's a journey you have to undertake, and it's never going to be perfectly smooth, but you can certainly do things to mitigate making it as difficult as possible. One of those things is, to have a strategic plan when you're actually making the transition. So you're not just flying your CV out all over the place, applying for hundreds and hundreds of jobs, which I have heard some people do who really, really struggle. That's really demoralizing. And so, you can, like the approach I took, like taking some time to network and talk to people and make that transition as smooth as possible and try and understand exactly what it is you're moving into is going to help in smoothing out that transition process for sure. Because, you know, like I said, it is so different in industry versus academia that, you know, it's going to be a little bit of a cultural shock. There's no doubt about it. I felt it. I'm sure everybody who's made that transition has. But, you know, the transition from academia to industry is a path really well trodden. Most people will make it eventually. They will move out into industry. The statistics show that most people will not stay in academia and become professors. They will make that transition. So plenty of people have done it, and I'm sure they've all got their own personal experience of how they did it. But, you know, it does take some effort, and it is a step. So it can only be as smooth as you can make it. I know that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but it's never going to be a perfect step out. Not now, at least, I think, because there isn't a natural pathway out yet into internships and things like that, as there is maybe for some undergraduate and graduate roles in industry. But they are coming, and things are changing, and there's more of a talk and a narrative now around transitions into industry for research staff and students. So it is starting to change, and that transition will become smoother, I'm sure, in the future for more people, as people in academia start to realise that most of their students will take that step and their postdocs, and it just becomes a natural route. I'm sure it will eventually become smoother, but right now, you know, you have to put some effort in, and you have to work on yourself and do the research to know what it is you want to do, and talk to the right people, talk to people who can help you, who have made that transition. So look for the PhDs who are working in those positions that you're interested in, and, you know, they will help you make your mind up and give you advice on how they made that transition. So again, sorry, I'm coming back to networking again, but the more people you can talk to, the more help you will have, and the transition itself will be smoother.
So actually, I agree with absolutely everything you said, Vicky. And if I could add something to this, then two things. First thing is, I think that universities already spotted the problem, so I can see that there is increased amount of interest in careers in young researchers, and there's increased amount of investment in career, like coaching services and courses and career fairs. So the problem was definitely spotted. I think that the way universities approach it could still be better, because I think there's still not enough dialogue between academia and industry, like live dialogue. So the fact that you hire a former academic to become a career advisor at the university doesn't mean that they will give the proper career advice. It's much more complicated than that. But there's definitely a shift in the right direction, and so I'm happy to see, and I'm looking forward to the further developments, and the second thing is, I think that the difficulty of the career switch between academia and industry is not that much even about your topic or the branch of science you come from, but it's more about what is the mental difference you have to make, and how much you need to redefine yourself. And let me explain. So let's assume that you work in a team as a PhD student, you have some project, a specialistic project, and you want to do similar research in a company, and you want to join some other team in a company and do work on similar topics, just don't have this publication pressure, and no publication pressure, and no fear of tomorrow, fear of tomorrow. So a permanent contract, that's your criteria, but you're generally interested in doing the same type of work, just in a different setting. Then I think the transition is relatively simple, because with your skills and with your experience, you will be wanted everywhere with open hands, and you will probably get a good paycheck day one. So I think in that case, the transition is quite straightforward. But the problem starts when you feel I just have to redefine my role in the society. I have to redefine the way the role I'm playing towards other people. I don't want to be a specialist anymore. I really want to work with people, work with many teams, be a leader, create some community. I want to solve global problems. I'm not a specialist. I'm a generalist. I want to have an overview of the big problem. And then that's hard, because to do that, you have to go through two steps. First, you have to define that new role, and that takes time. That takes a ton of time to get to know yourself and get to know what is your new mission and how you will, what is your optimal role and in what setting. And second, to prove yourself in that new role, because if you want to just throw yourself in the deep water and prove yourself doing something new, then you might not be trusted at first, and you will not get the job as fast, and that's and you might start from a really low paycheck or no paycheck, and you have to work your way back to the salary you had before, and it can be a long and painful process. So I think that, to sum up, the difficulty is not that much about the type of science you did before, but more about the distance, mental distance between what you did before and what you're planning to do next.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And I could just add on to that, actually. If you use your knowledge, as you were explaining, to make that transition, so you're a subject matter expert and you move into industry as a subject matter expert. For example, perhaps you take a postdoc in a lab somewhere, in a pharma lab. That's a transition a lot of people make. That's good exposure then to, getting your foot in the door and then seeing how a company operates and trying to learn more about other auxiliary roles that you could move into. This is a big distinction in industry. Once you've moved out into industry, somebody is taking care of your career in a way. If you're working in a company, it's different if you're going to go and set your own company up or work as a freelancer. But when you're in a company, you're talking to your line manager on a regular basis, or you should be at least, about your career and where things are going. And annually, you will have an appraisal. This does happen in academia, but it's so different in as much as, if you don't get the funding, if you don't make the cut, if you don't get the publications, you won't progress. Whereas in industry, it's more, there's more options available to you. So you can talk about your career and where you want your career to develop. So you could start off in a very technical role, but eventually you could say, I want to manage the lab, or, I would like to try marketing. And there are ways in a big enough company to move and try different things. So I know scientists who have moved across and done scientific roles in industry and then moved, and they are now general managers heading up, whole divisions or sections, because they expose themselves and experience different things within the company. If you want to remain a specialist, eventually you will just have to work in that niche area for the company, and progressing into the management levels really won't happen, because you have to expose yourself, the high management levels, I should say. So you have to expose yourself to different aspects of how the company work to really progress. So, I would say you can use that as a stepping stone in industry, and you can, then try and develop other things if you think you might have an interest in them, or you can stay as a specialist. You can keep working your way up, to a senior scientific role, and you can also transition back to academia again if you want, because you will remain a subject matter expert in that particular area. So once you make the transition to industry, there are actually more options available to you. I would say that. And you have regular conversations about your career. You might not do necessarily as a postdoc, because those conversations are more about where you're going to apply for money and whose lab you should go and work in next, rather than, direct career progression into a faculty role necessarily.
Okay, so let me ask you, thank you, and let me ask you another question, which is about Biomed Badass. So I would like to know a little bit more about how it started, and, well, you told us how it started, but in what shape the blog is now and what your plans are, and tell us a little bit more about this project.
Sure. So I think I explained, when I made the transition to medical communications, medical writing, people were asking me, they were mainly people from my lab and also other labs that, I knew within departments that I'd worked in the past, asking me, how it was to work in that industry, how I made the transition, things like this. So I decided to start the blog. and more people reached out to me asking similar questions. So I just over time used those questions and suggestions to mold the content for the blog and try and answer as many questions as I could. And that's essentially what I still do. I'm quite excited because I'm going to start, similar to you, Natalia, a YouTube channel to try and speak better to visual learners, because at the minute, you know, obviously everything's written on the blog, but I would like to try and explain things in a visual way and maybe a more succinct way, in short 10-minute blocks. So I will experiment a little bit with that. So I'm quite excited to get started there. That's kind of where the future of it will go. But you know, generally it is a blog there to help people and to offer advice and support. And if people have questions about making a career transition generally or into medical writing, you know, drop me a question and I always try and answer where I can on the blog. So that's kind of how it evolved and the reason for it. It was really quite an organic thing, I think. And, you know, to begin with, I was just, you know, offering advice because, you know, it's the right thing to do. And I was trying to support people as best I can. But I've really developed a passion for this now, you know, talking to people and trying to help them, guide them in what they think, what they're struggling with and what they think they might want to do. You know, this has really become quite a passion for me, alongside the day job of being a medical writer. So I'm, you know, looking over the last few years that I've been writing this blog, it's grown, and I've really got interested in a way that I never expected I would when I first set out on it. I have developed a passion, and I think that's another piece of career advice that I have for people. If you know, a lot of people say follow your passion, and it gets back to what you were talking about earlier, Natalia, when people decide early on they're pushed into a particular way because they show a talent in something when they're small and when they're at school as a child, and they don't really explore other options. And I think, you know, we're all told we've got to look at our passions and what we'd like to do, and we follow things that we know other people are doing or that we see on TV. You know, someone's a vet, someone's a doctor, and or a lawyer, and we should all try and, you know, progress our way through that. But actually, there are so many jobs out there that you would never have a clue about until you get out into the world of work and discover for yourself that the options are infinite. And how do you even know where to put your talents? So this whole question about passion and following your passion can, I think, be a little bit misleading. I'm sure as researchers we were all interested in science, and we wanted to go and work in a lab later on, and we followed our passion, right? But you can develop a passion if you identify a problem and you try and start helping people with that. I've discovered you can actually develop a passion in something and also solve a problem at the same time. So there are different ways to think about career and deciding on the jobs you would like. And I think there's a whole narrative and discussion to have around that, and the advice we get when we're very young, which I think is what you brought up earlier, Natalia.
Yeah, indeed. If I can
yeah.
add something to this,
Sure.
I also think that passion often happens at a certain level of proficiency, and that's often also what academics say, that successful researchers who went really far, they often say that they only started feeling love for what they do once they already got to the point that they were fluent and that they had enough success, that they felt confident with what they know, and then they started feeling real pleasure from doing it. So it's often the case that it's like develops slowly, burns slowly, but the flame, you know, the flame has to ignite, and sometimes it needs years. So I 100% agree.
Exactly. And you can only, once you reach a level of proficiency, you can only really start to understand what you don't know, right? Because then the questions expand exponentially. You know, when you become a subject matter expert, you start to realize what the boundaries of human knowledge are. And as PhDs, we have that. You know, we're working at the boundaries of human knowledge. You are a subject matter expert. So at that point, you can start to enjoy. But I absolutely agree with you. You know, you have to develop over years, months at least, or years, a level of expertise to try and see what those problems are and help solve them. And that's when you develop a passion, which is exactly what happened to me with the whole careers thing and the Biomed Badass blog.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about your general plans? Do you have some general vision for what you want to do in the next 5 years?
Sure. So right now, because of personal circumstances of what's happened in my private life, I've had to leave my job in London behind, and we moved for my husband's work to Dublin. The great thing about being a medical writer is if you've got a few years experience and you've got some contacts, you can freelance, which was one of the big draws for me as well. When I was researching, I'd spoken to people who'd done a few years freelancing, and then they'd gone back and worked for a company and then done freelancing again. It's always there. It's quite a flexible job, and I needed flexibility. I have a young family. My husband's job is the kind of, he works for a multinational, and we could get moved at any moment to any part of the world. So I needed flexibility. Otherwise, I would probably have become an MSL because I quite like that work, or I'd like the idea of it. I spoke to many MSLs when I was thinking about my career transition. But the traveling and the prescriptive need to be in a particular region was quite limiting for me. So with the medical writing, it gives a lot more flexibility. So right now, we've just made this move about 6-7 months ago to Dublin, to Ireland. And I'm working as a freelance medical writer, using my contacts that I had before when I was working in London. And also, you know, having other people reach out to me through those contacts. So it's a real word of mouth industry, which is why I suggest if you want to work as a freelancer, as a medical writer, to first do a few years in the industry itself to get to know people, and then you can make that transition. So I'm figuring out how to, you know, set up a company and work for myself and pay taxes and all the things that go with that. So it's all been very interesting. And I will do that for a while we need this level of flexibility. I would eventually like to go back into a company though and work on my management skills. As I said to you before, I really enjoyed managing the lab and working with people and helping them develop and grow in their careers. That's a real passion for me. I can see that, you know, now with the blog as well. I think that's where that kind of passion comes from. It's helping junior people really excel. I love that. So I would like to go back into and work my way into a management role in a company at some point, I think. And I will just keep going with the blog and now the vlog as well, the video blogs that I'm going to put out, and just see where it goes and see if I can help develop that in any way forward as well. So I'm kind of a junction at the minute and thinking about different things I can do. But the great thing is, you know, I have options, and that's just, you know, medical writing is fantastic for flexibility and options if that's what you want from your career. So and even now, you know, with remote working, I was remote working as a medical writer. I was going into London 2 days a week and working from home the rest of the time. So, you know, it had flexibility in the industry before the lockdown. It's just a naturally flexible industry. So if you're looking for flexibility, I could strongly recommend medical writing as a career.
And can I ask a question? How about having your own company? Because if you like medical writing and if you like managing people and if you like independence, then it, you know, sounds like it might be an option.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I have considered that. Not right now. I actually have a baby who's only 1 year old, and I would like to see her in school and then make a decision. I have contacts also that I was working with before in London who are interested in setting up agencies potentially in the future. So that might be something we would consider. As I said before, the market is growing, but it's also becoming more and more competitive. And I think you would, like most things, need to develop a niche for yourself and work your way in through that. So I'm still, you know, I only transitioned in 2017. I'm still new to the industry in a way, and I'm still learning. I'm still making contacts. So it's not the right moment for me now, but it is a distinct possibility of something I might consider in the future, yeah.
But I mean, I enjoy having a company so much that I'm currently on a mission to convert as many people I know as possible into entrepreneurs. I think, yeah, I keep on doing that for another few years probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
can I make a comment on that, Natalia?
Yeah.
I think entrepreneurship and PhDs go hand in hand, actually. I think it's the most fantastic training to become an entrepreneur because, you know, you are your own boss. You have to be self-disciplined. You have to tick all the boxes that an entrepreneur needs to do. You have to be able to work, all night if your experiment needs it. You have to be able to take criticism, huge criticism, write for funding, get in front of people into a panel, and have them eat you alive trying to get money from them. That's exactly what entrepreneurs do. So, I think if anyone's done a PhD, they've actually done a training in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and actually, the thing that helped me the most in developing a company is actually not what I had during my PhD, but rather what I didn't have. So I was quite under supervised. And the fact that I always had to find my own ways and work around the problems and, plan everything. And, I was quite on my own. That, the fact that was actually the part of my PhD that I hated the most. But from perspective, this is what helped me the most now when I set a company.
Yeah, it makes you resourceful, right? When you don't have much supervision, you become resourceful on your own. You have to. It's sink or swim time.
True, and also I think it doesn't really matter what happens to you, but what you do with this. So even if you have a problem, you can turn this problem into something good if you think long enough and you have a plan, if you create a plan out of it. So I think almost anything that happens to us, unless it's something really tragic, like, you lose a leg in a bomb accident, that's clearly not a very good event that you might potentially turn into your advantage. But most of the problems, like everyday problems, have some good sides if you look long enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're the ultimate problem solver as well, I think, as a PhD. That's what you learn how to do, is to solve problems continuously, and often very unsupervised if you're not in a very supportive team or have a supportive supervisor. So you're absolutely right. You're perfect training for entrepreneurship.
Okay, so let me ask you this question, as this is something I often ask towards the end of the webinar. What's the general advice you would have, or some life hacks, maybe something that you would like to share with more junior researchers, those who are hesitating what to do next, or those who already took a decision?
Yeah, I would say don't do the mistakes that I made, and start planning early. Think about what it is you want. Don't leave it until you're writing up your thesis or you've just submitted to start doing this investigation. I said I started 3 years before I actually made the transition, but in reality, the transition itself took me at least 6 months. By the time I decided what I wanted to do, and I was networking with the right people and sending out the applications to where I knew I wanted them to go, and tailoring those applications to those different companies and the work that I knew they were doing. It took time. And starting just with knowing that your contract's about to end in 3 months, you have left it quite late. And I do get a lot of people reach out to me at the blog saying, well, I've only just, started my PhD 6 months, a year ago. I don't really need to think about these things now. I've still got 3 years ahead of me. But I would say, this is an ongoing process, and professional development is an ongoing process. And you should be making time for yourself in your working week. I didn't, and I ended up, drifting at some points in my career. And I think, that's not a good way to be. You should be making time for developing yourself and deciding what you want to do, and also generating the skills that you would need to move into particular jobs. So really, there's so many resources now that you can use, like Coursera and different types of online resources that you can tap into to try and develop your CV in the right way for the transition you need to make. But these things are going to take time. And then I get back to my point again. I'm like a stuck record about it, but network. Reach out to people. People actually hate me saying to them, you need to go and network. Because network has such this horrible connotation to it. I say this all the time, that people feel like they have to go out and sell themselves and say how wonderful they are. But realistically, when you're researching and thinking about the different jobs you can do, it's basically about having a conversation with a very interesting person who's got a different experience of life to you, and asking them about themselves. And what I found is the vast majority of people, when you ask them what it is that they're doing and how they're enjoying it, and what aspects that they enjoy and they don't enjoy, and where they would like to go next, those general questions, people love talking about themselves and their own lives. and it's easy for them. You make it easy for them, but at the same moment, you're learning about if that's going to be the right career for you. So you really should be making time to build your network, a supportive group of people around you. And I carry that network with me now. The network that I established during that initial stages of trying to work out what it was I wanted to do. I said I wanted to be an MSL. I still have those people in my network. I still talk to them, even though I'm not an MSL. And some of them have gone on to do different things in pharma, but I've built a supportive network, and you can keep that network with you, and they can help you throughout your career as you go on. So it's really a fantastic thing to do, and to start doing now, yesterday. There's no reason you can't start doing that now, even if you don't go into that career in the future. Just go and explore. And it is difficult because we're all under time pressures to produce work. And I know what lab work's like. It's things don't work and you need to pick stuff up and do other things. And you've never done as a researcher, ever. There's always more to do. But I really would suggest taking a bit of time out in your working week, even if it's just a few hours on a Friday afternoon or on a Saturday morning, and devoting that to yourself and your personal development. That is the biggest thing I would say that people should do, because I never did it and I wish I had.
Yeah, I fully 100% agree. And I think that many people think, and I thought that like this as well some time ago, that career development is basically taking good key decisions. So like taking the best major, the best studies, getting to the best university, and then you're set for 5 years. You can just do your studies, and then you choose the right first job, and then you choose, for instance, a good PhD, and then it's like every single time you basically change a job or change a profession, which happens every few years. This is the decision point, and this is where you're building your career. But now I know that people who do who are best at career development are people who actually understand that this is a process that happens every day, because you're building your impact slowly day by day, and this is your decision if you decide to spend this evening on playing football, or maybe writing another article, maybe calling some of your former colleagues and asking how they are doing. And like if you take the right decisions over a long period of time, then all of a sudden you are well connected, and that's when you have the most opportunities and you build the best career.
Absolutely. And even coming out into industry, where I said, there are options for you, and you can develop your career in different ways that you might interest you. You do have to have your own self-initiative to go to your line manager, your manager, and say, I would be interested in trying my hand in marketing for a month. Is there any opportunity that I could take up some marketing or some business development? You really need to be driving your career every stage. And as a PhD student, you may not think that's important to you. You need to get your publications and your papers done and your work done and your thesis ready. But actually, these other things and networking are equally important. And if you do even end up staying in academia, your network and who you talk to in academia is incredibly important too. Yes, you need to have the publications and the papers, but you also need to know who you need to be talking to know what positions are becoming available at which universities, what fellowships are open, and how do you prepare those applications in the right way. This is all networking. So it's an essential skill, and really it needs to be told to people on their first day, their first week at university, that it's something that their professional development and their networking is something they really need to start at an early stage.
Okay, great. And great. Thank you so much. And like last question, I would like to ask you, for people who might be watching this webinar or later on an episode on YouTube, and if they are interested in collaborating with you in some way after watching this episode, for instance, collaborating on your blog, writing something for you, into what capacity are you interested in these collaborations, and how can they best contact you?
Absolutely. I'm always open to collaborating with people. I love collaborations. I loved it as an academic, and I love it now. Please reach out to me at the blog. It's www.biomedbadass.com. My email address is on there, info@biomedbadass. And you can just reach out to me. I'm very approachable. I'm on LinkedIn, so please connect with me there. We can chat through LinkedIn. And I'm happy to collaborate with people. and discuss more. And if anybody's interested in, like I said before, medical communications, or more generally how they can help develop their CV, please reach out to me. I'm talking about these things all the time. I'm building a community. We have a forum at the blog as well, so people are on there discussing various aspects of their careers. So you can find the forum at my website as well. And I'm always open to collaboration. And if anybody wants to guest post on my blog, absolutely, please reach out to me. I'm happy with that. Happy to work with people on that.
Okay, fantastic. So the last question: what
Sure.
shall we wish you? What would you? What are your dreams? What are your hopes for the future? What shall we wish you for?
What are my dreams for the future? You know, since I've started this blog and I started thinking more and more about PhDs and where we end up in industry and academia and how we get on in the world, I am interested in, you know, my wish would be that as PhDs, we connect and we support each other. I mean, most of us are going to end up out in the private sector at some point in our careers. And out there, you know, there are lots of people with MBAs and are business focused, and they tend to be at the higher echelons of companies, running companies and on boards and executive level jobs. And I think, you know, they have a network. They all went to particularly prestigious MBA college to get their MBAs, and, you know, they hire each other. And I think as PhDs, now that we're getting out into industry and the massive skills that we have, that we bring in troubleshooting and problem solving and all the fantastic things we bring to companies, how we push stuff forward and we're innovative, we too should be supporting ourselves in the same way. We too should be, you know, getting into hiring level jobs and looking at other PhDs and supporting their careers through that, and working our way onto the boards and having, you know, our logical approach and our outlook, rather than being viewed as, you know, knowledge subject experts who can't really think outside of that. It's a false image out there, potentially, that people, I'm not saying everybody has it, but potentially that image is still there of PhDs, that we're not able to think widely and in a business context. And that's a complete misconception. And I think, you know, it's our job as PhDs to go out there and really show the skills that we have and be great ambassadors for the education that we have. My huge belief that if you've got a solid grounding in any kind of scientific education, you know, the world is your oyster. You can turn your hand to anything because you have the logical approach. You can deal with the numbers. You can make decisions based on data. And, you know, that is going to help any company. And so we need to be out there supporting ourselves as a community. And that's my biggest wish, that we can support our way through our career development together as a collective group of PhDs.
Fantastic! What a fantastic ending to this webinar. Great. So I wish you all the best, Vicky, also for you personally.
Thank you.
And thank you. Thanks to everyone for watching and for participating in the webinar. And
thank you so much, Natalia, for inviting me. It was brilliant.
Niraj is saying, thanks Natalia and Victoria, amazing discussion. I look forward to tuning more often. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Niraj. And
thank you, Niraj.
Okay, so have a good evening, everyone, and you can expect that this material will be posted on YouTube today or tomorrow. And goodbye, everyone, and have a nice evening.
See you. Thank you. Bye-bye.